Hey everybody, we're about to go into our 8 to becoming great at handling a disaster or a pandemic. And in pandemic planning, processing in a pandemic, these are the 8 main questions. And I've really just broken it down to 8, but they're going to kind of expand a little bit as we go through that I would have to make sure are answered and that I would go through in a pandemic planning process or exercise or even a workshop to get everybody to think about and get everybody to answer. I also want to stress the importance of making sure you're documenting this process. Are you ready? This is the 8 to becoming great at handling a disaster and, of course, processing in a pandemic. Number 1, in the event of a pandemic, who is your alternate for leading the department or coordinating work? That's right. Right away, I want to go, who's the alternates? Who's available? This is the really know your team question. And I mean, really know your team. There's no telling who will be available when a pandemic strikes. I've told people for years, when you test your plans, and you better test your plans, don't put it on an Outlook calendar for everybody to see. I have never seen a disaster say, we're going to be there Friday at 3 o'clock. I don't know of how this pandemic could have said, hey, watch out, April, nobody's going anywhere. No pandemic, no real world situation or problem is going to call ahead and ask you, is this a convenient time? You have to be prepared at all times, and that means knowing who is available if your team leaders and department heads are not available, who can fill in their shoes. It means knowing who the team leader is, who the department manager is, but also knowing who could take over in their place if it became necessary. It's a hard truth at times, but if someone is sick, if someone is unavailable, then who can step in and who can take over? Make sure you know who are the players on each team, not just the individual leaders. Number 2, what are the absolutely critical, bare minimum functions that must be completed by each department every single day without fail? This is a time for an organization to be able to identify what keeps the organization going, what keeps the organization processing. Again, it's perfectly okay for them to report back with nothing, nada, zilch. The question is not how important what they're doing is to the organization, which they're all going to want to be important, and I'm sure they are in some way, but the question is what is critical, what is crucial, what, if not completed, will have the biggest impact on your account holders. For example, posting of payroll, posting of any credit payments, maybe the most important thing you do every day to get people their money. What about processing exceptions? These are things that have to be done. They are still going to happen, even in a pandemic, if not even more in a pandemic. But what about running analysis on the last 3 months of activity to determine if there are any areas where our account holders would benefit from being more aware of our long-term CD interest rates? Okay, yeah, one of those 3 things, that's not critical. But you've got to be able to determine what is critical. It's an important step to be taken. You've got to figure out what are those critical things that must be done, those things that must be completed, even the things that have to be verified and checked at times. All right, let's move on to number 3. Who is responsible for each critical function and who is cross-trained? All right, a lot of questions in one. Told you it would happen. If the answer is no one is cross-trained, you've got a problem. You've got a huge problem. You have to bear in mind that some employees may be sidelined or become reserves in the event of a widespread outbreak. But they can't come off the bench and go to bat for you if they don't know how to play the position you're asking them to play. Cross-training is always important. You remember that militaristic thing I was talking about? I know in the military, during their exercises, they would call it testing the plan. See, the military is known for having observers that have the ability to pull someone from the exercise. There are 2 key points I want to make in this example here. First, have an observer during your testing. It works well, especially an outside observer. As a consultant, I do this. I know others that will do it for you too. And it can also help in the live implementation of the plan as well. Have someone that is knowledgeable. Someone, could be your staff or external again, that is trained, that can watch you as you are going through the exercises, as you are going through and testing the plan, maybe even as you're implementing it, and it is a good idea as you're implementing it, that they can take notes and they can help you to identify what's working and what doesn't. And in that testing mode, when you are in a testing mode of the pandemic plan, give that observer the ability to pull someone out. I mean to completely remove someone from being part of the testing. Wait, what? Yeah, I mean the ability to remove or pull somebody out of the exercise. Why? Well, in the military, when they're performing exercises, it's not uncommon for an observer to remove someone that has been identified as being too key or too critical to the operation. In other words, what they're doing is they see that it's getting to a point where the team can't function without that key person. Well, what if something happens to that key person during the maneuver or exercise? Well, that's why they remove them from the training practice exercise so that the team can learn to be able to perform without that key person, to be able to see how does the team, how do functions perform without that key person. It's something that has been done in testing. If it happens in a live event, then your key people will know what to do. If they're not available, your team will know not what to do. And if your team doesn't know what to do, you're in trouble. In smaller organizations, I see this type of thing too often. There seems to always be that one key person. They know everything. You know, that one person that everyone goes to for the answer. That one person that knows how all the pieces fit together. Well, once you identify that you have that one key person, you're screwed. Sorry, forgive me for saying you, but you better make darn sure that cross-training's taking place so that there is at a minimum at least one other person, I'd like multiples, but at least one other person that can fill in if needed. And you better have some incredibly documented procedures available. Because again, you are documenting all this, right? You're taking notes as we're going through. I hope so. Let's move on. The point of the question for number 4 is we're going to be able to need to have a list of critical functions. See, number 4 requires that we go down the list and we answer this. What would happen if a critical function could not be completed? Yeah, we know what we need to have done, but what would happen if it could not be completed? Before all of this happened, really, before COVID-19, I would have said a good baseline or a benchmark timeline to consider would have been 2 weeks, maybe a month. Now you need to be thinking in terms of an entire quarter. And truthfully, now it's possibly longer. Okay, it's probably longer, more like 2 quarters, 6 months. It's actually getting to the point that I think having a plan for a full year of operations for everything you would do through a full year is going to be a good idea. See, this one helps us in being able to rate critical functions, but also makes us realize what will be our plan B, maybe even a plan C. If we can't get something done, you must have a backup plan or a plan of how it will be communicated to the rest of the team, or in a severe event, communicated to your account holders who are unable to perform that function. All right, number 5 is next. This is one that comes up a lot. What is the minimum operating structure for your department to carry out only those critical functions? For right now, I just want you to be thinking about that. We've had a lot of questions so far, a lot to think about. We're going to address those in the upcoming videos. From the previous questions, we know who's in charge. We know the team in case someone else has to take over. We know who does what. How well they do it, I hope too. We know what is critical, and we know what to do if a critical function cannot be completed. Now it's time for looking at our operating structure. We're going to save this one for the second half of the next class coming up. Stay tuned.